I told myself it was just a joke, something I said after a couple of cocktails, nothing serious, nothing worth reacting to. I don't even see what's so wrong with wanting a little attention, a little freedom for one night. Why does it have to mean something bigger? Why did he take it like that? I thought it would make him laugh, loosen him up, make the night feel lighter. Instead, something in his face changed in a way I had never seen before. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. My name is Leora Voss. I am 32 years old. I lead the visual team at Axiom Creative, and I have spent the last decade building a life that looks exactly right from every angle that matters. The apartment is good, third floor, south-facing, our daughter Ivy's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with round magnets, and my husband Cade's work boots lined up by the door with the careful habit of a man who does the same thing the same way every day. The job is good. The salary means I do not think about the bill when I choose the wine. The marriage is stable and correct and exactly what you are supposed to want at 32, which is when I began to understand that stable and correct are not the same as interesting. The balcony is narrow and faces south, and in the evenings the street below is busy enough that a phone call reads as background noise to anyone inside. Cade was in the kitchen helping Ivy with a puzzle when I first stepped out to answer a message from Noel. He was a bartender I had met when Petra brought the Axiom team to the Quartz after the Houghton pitch, a man with the kind of easy confidence that I found myself thinking about on the drive home. He had mentioned a branding idea for the club's private tier, and I had saved the number for that reason, or so I told myself for approximately 1 week. The balcony call lasted 22 minutes. I kept my voice at a register that would sound professional through the glass door. When Cade appeared in the doorway to say Ivy was asking for me at bedtime, I ended the call and went inside without saying who it was. On the Sunday that followed, while Ivy was at a playdate, Cade sat beside me at the small desk where I was pretending to read a brief. He asked whether things between us were all right, not because he expected a problem, he said, but because I seemed further away in the evenings. He mentioned that my phone had been face down on the balcony railing 3 evenings running, which was not my usual habit, and he asked directly who I had been speaking to before Ivy's bedtime, because the call had been long enough that the battery dropped and I had plugged the phone in the moment I came through the door. He offered that if something about the marriage was bothering me, he wanted to hear it from me rather than piece it together on his own. I told him that monitoring a phone battery was a creative new form of jealousy, that the call was professional, and that his need to track the length of my work conversations said more about his state of mind than mine. 2 days later, he tried again, saying that Sasha had called the house phone on a Wednesday evening looking for me, and that he had told her I was with her, and that Sasha had gone quiet in a way that carried its own answer. He asked where I had actually been. I said Sasha had confused the dates, that the balcony was where I went to think, and that a husband who kept a record of his wife's phone screen position across multiple evenings was working through an anxiety problem that had nothing to do with me. He said goodnight at 7:15, which was 3 hours before either of us usually went to bed, and the apartment held that early quiet for the rest of the evening. The parking structure beneath Axiom Creative runs 7 levels down and always smells faintly of cold concrete and machine oil. By 6:15 on a Thursday, the upper floors are nearly empty, which is why I told Noel to park on the 4th when I texted him earlier that afternoon. I had already told Cade I would be late, that a client revision needed one last pass. It had been finished by 4. I didn't look too closely at what filled the hours after that. The Meridian Bar sits 2 streets from the business district, the kind of place meant for people who never stay long. We took the far corner, ordered 1 cocktail each. Mine was gin and lime, the plastic stirrer snapping slightly when I pressed it against the glass. I left it there when we stood. I paid with the joint card without thinking, the same automatic motion as any work night, not considering how it would look later, reduced to numbers on a statement. When I got home at 9:40, Cade was at the kitchen table with his laptop. He asked if I was hungry. I said I'd eaten at the office and went to change. When I came back, he was in the hallway talking about recycling. I didn't notice the laptop closing or what he had already seen. He brought it up 4 days later when the apartment was quiet without Ivy. His phone sat between us, the charge pulled up, precise and undeniable. He listed the time, the place, the inconsistency. He asked for a simple explanation. I gave him something clean and controlled, something that would end the conversation if he let it. But he didn't. And even after I walked away, I could hear him typing, small, deliberate sounds that stayed with me longer than they should have. The Axiom end-of-quarter drinks had been planned for the rooftop terrace, but the venue fell through and Petra redirected the group to the Quartz at 7:30 on a Thursday. I had texted Cade at 7:15 to say a team event was running late and I would be home after 9. This was accurate in the way that a statement can be accurate and still leave out the part that matters. I had known for 4 days that the event had moved to the Quartz, Noel's club, and had said nothing about the redirect to Cade, and I had not asked myself why I had not mentioned it. The evening opened well. 11 of us took the 2 VIP booths at the back of the main floor, and the hexagonal stone tiles carried the bass from the speaker system in a low, steady vibration up through the bench seats. By the second round, the booth had expanded to include 2 people from accounts, and the conversation had reached the loose, permission-giving register that a mixed group at a cocktail bar arrives at when no one has an early morning and the lighting is warm enough to make everyone slightly more generous with themselves. Noel was behind the bar in the way he always was, present without announcing himself, attentive to specific people without being obvious about it. He sent a round to our booth without being asked, and I felt Petra noticed the gesture but said nothing, and held my phone at a different angle when I sent my thanks across the bar. By the third drink, someone asked what everyone would do with a completely free weekend. Someone said 14 hours of sleep. I said over the rim of my glass, in the easy tone that had been working all evening, that I would start by having someone buy me another drink. And then, without fully planning what came next, I said that whoever bought me one tonight could spend the night with me. The booth laughed and I laughed with them, and Noel appeared at the end of the booth at exactly that moment with a tray and caught my eye over the noise with a look that the entire table could read. I had not looked toward the bar before I said it. If I had looked, I would have seen Cade and Rem standing near the service end, 3 minutes arrived from the street, close enough to hear everything clearly in the pause between songs. Rem had suggested catching the last of the team event, and Cade had agreed. They had come in from the cold and found a standing place at the bar, and I had delivered every word to a room that included my husband at a distance of approximately 4 meters. Cade did not move for a moment. Then he ordered a water and found a space near the side wall and waited, without crossing to the booth, for the moment I would look up. I looked up 8 minutes later. He was watching me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not anger, not tears, but a kind of final clarity, the specific look of a person who has been asking a question for months and has just received the only honest answer available. I said his name. He said hello, in his most ordinary voice, and asked whether I was having a good evening. I crossed the floor to the coat check alcove, narrow, smelling of cold fabric and the citrus from the bar, and said the joke was nothing, that it was the kind of thing that came out at work events after a few drinks, that he needed context to understand it. He said he was not going to do this here, and that they would talk at home. His voice was level throughout, which meant that anyone watching from the booth could see him asking her to leave without seeing any upset in him. I walked back to the table. The booth resumed around me as if the 4-minute gap had not occurred. A woman at the adjacent table named Miriam had been filming her friend's reaction to a story and captured approximately 40 seconds of the booth area during the joke. My voice, the laughter, Noel's look at the end of the booth, and Cade visible at the bar with Rem beside him while the booth continued. Miriam had not planned to keep it. She posted it to her story at 11 p.m. with a caption about Thursday energy and tagged the Quartz. The club's account reposted it to their Friday highlights before morning. By the time I woke up, 63 people in the shared social circle had seen it, including Sasha, Rem, Helene, and 4 people from Axiom. In the rideshare home, Cade waited until the quieter stretch of the route before speaking. He said he had heard the joke, and he was not going to call it something other than what it was. A remark made in front of 11 people at a public venue, directed toward a man she had been meeting privately, while her husband stood close enough to hear every word. He asked what version of their marriage she had been describing to the room at that moment, and said if the joke was truly nothing, it should be easy to explain the gap between what she said in the booth and what she understood them to be. He named the coat check alcove. She had taken him to the most private corner of a public place to tell him it meant nothing, and he was asking whether she understood why that combination, performing publicly and managing him privately, was the part he could not absorb on its own. I told him he had the vocabulary of someone who had rehearsed being wronged, that a work event remark was not a statement of intent, and that a man with real confidence in himself and in his marriage did not require a post-event debrief about his wife's sense of humour. I said I was tired. He looked out the window for the rest of the ride and said nothing further. The following morning he set his phone face up on the kitchen counter with the Miriam video playing on mute, let it finish, and then asked whether I would have made the same joke knowing it was being recorded. He named the fire emoji contact, the Meridian charge, the parking structure entry, and the video, 4 items, and said he had been adding them and arriving at the same total each time, and that if the total was wrong, one sentence from her would correct it. He gave her approximately 45 seconds, the time it took the coffee to finish. I did not use the 45 seconds. I said the video was out of context, named Noel as the venue contact for the team event, and took my coffee to the balcony. When I came back inside, Cade was in Ivy's room reading to her with the same patient voice he always used, as if nothing in the previous 30 minutes had changed his direction. It had. Ivy asked the question on a Tuesday at the Alderton Primary pickup lane. The lane is wide and sun-bright at 3:15, and there were 6 other parents nearby when she took my hand and said, in the straightforward tone of a child who has absorbed something adult without understanding its full shape, whether the man whose name sounded like a holiday was going to come and live with them. She said she had heard Daddy say the name on the phone in the hallway very late, and Daddy's voice had been quiet and flat when he said it, not the voice he used when he talked about someone he liked. She asked whether the man was someone Mummy knew from work. I said he was a client, told her not to worry about late-night phone calls, and drove to the pharmacy on Crescent Street for her prescription. In the queue at the pharmacy, 2 women I recognized from the neighborhood gym were discussing a video from a club, not by name, not pointing toward me, describing a clip of a woman at a booth making a joke about spending the night and saying they felt worse for the husband who had apparently been standing right there in the background. I paid for the prescription without turning around. I sat in the car for 4 minutes before I started the engine. That evening, after Ivy was asleep, Cade sat at the end of the sofa, in the position of someone who had chosen the distance deliberately, near enough to speak quietly, far enough not to be touching. He said, without any of the emotion I had been bracing for, that he needed to understand what the next period looked like from her side, because from his side, the past 2 months had included concealed meetings, a deliberately renamed contact, a public statement made to a crowd in front of that contact while her husband was present, and a video record of that statement now circulating through every person they both knew. He said he was not asking for remorse, and he was not staging a verdict. He was asking whether she wanted to keep the marriage, and if she did, what she was prepared to put on the table to show it. Then he said that Ivy had used the word holiday to describe the name from the video, and that she had asked him directly whether the man was going to come and live with them. He asked what Leora intended to say if Ivy asked again, because the answer was going to shape what he decided to do next, and he was giving her the chance to be the one who answered it first. I told him that a 5-year-old constructing confused questions from overheard adult conversations was a result of adults having those conversations within earshot of her bedroom, and that if he wanted to protect Ivy's sense of security, He could start by not making late-night phone calls in the hallway at a volume that carried. I said he was using their daughter as leverage in an argument he could not otherwise win. My voice carried enough controlled hurt in it that the accusations sounded even to me like the response of someone wronged. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was going to make Ivy's lunch for tomorrow and go to bed early. He made the lunch. He went to bed. I sat on the sofa for another hour and began, for the first time and without wanting to count back through the previous 3 months and understand the difference between what I had believed I was managing and what I had actually been building. Sunday lunch at Helene's arrived with a formality that her usual lunches did not carry. Rem was already there when I arrived, and Marcus, my father, had been invited by Cade, which had not happened before. His presence gave the gathering the quality of being witnessed rather than simply shared. Helene waited until the main course was finished, and Ivy had gone to play in the back garden before she said anything. She did not begin with a softening. She said she had been watching Leora for 4 years and had kept her observations to herself because it was not her place. But it was no longer possible to keep them there now that a 5-year-old girl was sitting in the middle of it. She described what she had seen at 3 social events over the past year. The tone Leora used when she spoke about Cade to other people, the audiences she chose for those observations, the way she framed his concerns as evidence of his smallness rather than evidence of a real situation. She said she was not trying to be cruel. She was telling the truth because the truth had run out of room to stay quiet. Rem looked at his plate and then out the window and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Marcus looked at the tablecloth and asked whether anyone wanted more water, and then excused himself before dessert and did not come back to the table. I let Helene finish. Then I said, with the measured, pained tone I had been practicing, that I was deeply hurt by arriving at a family lunch and finding a coordinated character review that I had not been prepared for. I said I had been trying to reach Cade for weeks and been met with silence and emotional distance. I said the video had been taken entirely out of context. Helene looked at me without changing her expression and said she heard everything I said and that none of it answered the question of what Leora was going to do about Ivy. On the drive home, I built the offer. I told myself it was genuine, and in several parts it was. I would stop contact with Noel. I would attend couples therapy with any therapist Cade chose. I would be more open about my work schedule. These were real. The condition woven through every sentence of the offer, that Cade would step back from what I was privately calling his evidence project, was the part I did not name but embedded structurally in each point. That evening, I presented the offer using the word together many times and the phrase starting fresh twice. Cade listened to all of it and then asked one question. When I said stop contact permanently, did I mean ending the arrangement entirely and for good? Or did I mean pausing it while counselling ran, with the option of reassessing once the marriage felt more stable? I said of course I meant permanently. He said he heard me, and then he asked whether there was anything else he should know, any meeting, any charge, any contact, that was not accounted for in what I had just described. I said no. He said thank you for telling him, and went to the kitchen to make tea with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who had just received a partial truth offered as a complete one, and had noted the difference. The following morning, I found a printed transaction confirmation on the kitchen counter beside the coffee machine, a branch slip from the joint bank on Market Street, dated the previous Tuesday, confirming an in-person account review request. Cade had not mentioned the visit. The slip did not say what had been reviewed. I stood at the counter, read it twice, placed it in the recycling, and went to work. That afternoon, Petra stopped at my desk on her way to a meeting and said, without making it a conversation, that she hoped things were going better at home. I said everything was fine. She nodded with the specific quality of someone who already knows that is not the right answer but has no particular obligation to point it out. The hallway of the apartment had been changing for 3 weeks in ways I kept assigning to ordinary explanations. Cade's personal documents, passport, professional cards, the separate financial folder from the top drawer of the shared cabinet, had moved to the interior zipped pocket of his work bag, which now came upstairs from the car every evening rather than staying in the boot. His side of the shared filing cabinet had a new quality of emptiness. On Wednesday of that week, he came home from a second calendar entry, Clarence House, 3:30 p.m., that I had read as a work appointment, and after dinner he spent 40 minutes in the spare room with the door not quite closed, the laptop showing a plain file tree with tabbed sections before he minimized it with the same unhurried motion he used for everything. I went to bed. He came to bed an hour later, and his phone was on the desk rather than the nightstand, charged and face down. 2 days after the Clarence House entry, I came into the hallway in the morning and found the ceramic bowl empty. Not moved to a different surface, emptied. His keys were in his jacket pocket. The bowl, which had held both our keys and Ivy's hair ties, and the general small debris of shared daily life for 5 years, held one pen cap and nothing else. He was making Ivy's toast and asked whether I wanted any. His tone was completely ordinary. I looked at the bowl for a moment and told myself it was just keys. The bowl stayed empty for the rest of the week and I did not ask about it, because asking would have required naming what I thought it meant, and I was not ready to do that yet. On Saturday morning, while Cade took Ivy to the park, I opened my phone and wrote a post. It was not impulsive. I had been planning it since the Miriam video circulated, and I had decided that the way to correct the public picture was to publish a version of myself that made the original look like exactly what I had been claiming. A loose moment at a team event, amplified by a husband working through a confidence issue. I did not say any of that directly. I posted a photograph from a work event 2 years earlier, Cade not in the frame, with a caption about choosing peace and creative energy and people who understood the difference between confidence and a threat. I added a close friend's story with a longer version that described, without naming names, the past 3 months as a period of managing someone else's insecurity. I posted both at 10:48 and felt, for approximately 12 minutes, like the person who had taken the room back. Sasha called after 12 minutes. She sat across from me at her kitchen table with both hands around a mug and chose every word with unusual care. She said she had seen the story. She said she loved me, and then she said she was not going to confirm the timeline in the story to anyone who asked, because the timeline was not accurate, and she had already been asked once by Cade to confirm something and had answered him honestly, and she was not willing to give a different answer a second time. She said she had seen my location on the shared app we had both kept running since university, and she knew where I had been the evening I said I was at the office doing revisions. She was not going to say that out loud to anyone, she said, but she was also not going to say I was somewhere I had not been. I told her the situation had been built by Cade's anxiety rather than my choices. She looked at the table surface. She said she needed me to hear that this had moved past the point where any one person's support was going to change its shape, and then she did not say anything further. Petra, who followed my public account professionally, had already forwarded a screenshot of the peace and creative energy post to a mutual contact. That contact had sent it to Rem. Rem was at his mother's when it arrived. He forwarded it to Cade at 11:14. Cade was at the park pushing Ivy on the swings. He read the notification, put his phone in his jacket, and pushed Ivy on the swings for another 20 minutes with the focused presence he brought to everything he did for her. Then they came home. That evening, Cade sat with me at the kitchen table in what I understood only afterward was the final conversation of this kind that he intended to have. He did not mention the post. He said he was going to ask one thing, as plainly as he could. Was she willing to sit with him without conditions, without a prearranged version of events, and tell him honestly what the previous 4 months had been? And was she also willing to hear, honestly, what those months had been for him, before either of them made any decision about what came next? He said he believed there was still something in the marriage worth that conversation, and he was asking whether she believed the same. His trap question was the most precise one he had asked. He said the post she had published that morning used the phrase someone else's insecurity to describe the context of the past 3 months, and he was asking her to name one specific event that was genuinely evidence of his insecurity rather than a reasonable response to something she had actually done. He said he would hear it fully and take it seriously if she could name one. He kept his hands flat on the table. I said the post was a personal expression and not a line-by-line brief for cross-examination. I said I had been offering real changes for weeks and been met with what felt like a formal process rather than a marriage. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that had completed something rather than opened it, that he was going to handle the remaining matters in the way that made sense for their family, that his first concern was Ivy's routine and well-being, and that she should expect to hear from him through the appropriate channel in the coming days. I said, what appropriate channel? He said he meant a fair and documented process. He went to check on Ivy, who was already asleep. I stood in the kitchen alone, and the word documented stayed in the room with me like an object I could not move or account for. The following morning, Cade left for work before I came downstairs. On the hallway shelf, not where mail usually went, but on the exact spot where the empty ceramic bowl had stood before, he moved it. There was a plain white business card with a name in small print and the words, Independent Family Law Notary below it. It had been placed, not dropped. There was no legal language, no case number, no stamp. It was a card placed where I could not miss it, by a man who had been communicating something clearly for months, in a language I had been choosing not to read. The reception lobby at Axiom Creative has good morning light. The east-facing glass front lets the November sun come in low across the white marble desk and catch the leaves of the potted fig tree near the window, making the room feel warmer than it usually is. Demi was at her station at 8:50. I arrived at 8:58 in the grey dress I kept for client presentations, carrying a folder for the 9:30 pitch, having spent the previous evening in the focused professional preparation of someone who has decided over the past 36 hours that the business card on the shelf was a signal rather than an arrival. Rem was standing near the fig tree when I came through the door. He was wearing a jacket rather than his usual work clothes, and he was holding an untouched coffee. He nodded when I came in. I said his name and asked what he was doing here. He said he was just here. The process server entered the glass door 45 seconds after I did. Navy jacket, flat document envelope held by the short handle, the unhurried certainty of someone who had performed this function many times in many lobbies. She said my full legal name. I confirmed it. She said she was serving me with a formal divorce petition, filed the previous Friday with the Family Law Division, accompanied by a motion for temporary financial orders covering the joint accounts, mortgage access, and joint credit facility, and an interim parenting schedule for Ivy Voss pending the first case management hearing. She said the hearing date was on the second page. She placed the envelope on the marble desk beside Demi's monitor and stepped back. Petra had been crossing from the elevator toward the door when the process server spoke. She stopped. Demi's hands left the keyboard. The evidence schedule began on page 7. It named the Miriam video, publicly posted, archived, time-stamped, the caption identifying the venue and establishing the public nature of the event. It named the Meridian Bar charge, dated, appearing on an evening whose stated location was Axiom Creative. It named the parking structure entry log, joint car pass, after-hours timestamp, preceding the Meridian charge, in a sequence that mapped to a location separate from the one she had described. It named the fire emoji contact as documented through Ivy Voss's description, recorded in a dated note by Cade Voss. It named a telephone conversation with Sasha Dre, in which Sasha confirmed that Leora had not been at her home on the Wednesday in question. It named the Saturday public post, screenshot, caption intact, as a voluntary public statement that contradicted the factual record. And it named a signed statement from Rem Voss, describing what he had heard and seen at the courts on the night of the incident: the booth, the remark, Cade's position at the bar, and the coat check alcove exchange in precise and dated language. I looked up from the page. Rem was still near the fig tree, not watching me with hostility or satisfaction, just with the quiet steadiness of someone observing something they had understood was coming for a long time. I said toward the room that there had been a significant misunderstanding, that this was not what it appeared to be, that the context for the events described was more complex than a document could carry. Demi stood from her station and went to the copy room without a word. Petra stood near the elevator with her professional expression, the one she used when a client brief arrived and she was reorganizing without showing the work. And then she went through the door to the stairs without speaking. Rem said nothing until I turned to him and said that Cade should have come to me first, that this was a decision they should have made together. Rem said, quietly and without cruelty, that Cade had tried to reach her 14 times, and that he knew because he had been the person Cade called after each one. He set the untouched coffee on the lobby bench and walked out through the glass door. Through the front window, I could see him on the pavement in the low November light, already moving past this moment in the way that people do when they have been carrying something for a long time and have finally been allowed to put it down. I had believed, from the balcony to the booth to the lobby, that the room always belonged to whoever spoke most confidently in it. Every performance, the joke, the post about peace and creative energy, the compromise offer with its careful hidden conditions, had felt like the specific power of a person who controlled the story. What the document on the marble desk described was a different kind of record. Not a story, a log, dates, charges, video timestamps, a child's description of a renamed phone contact, a best friend's honest answer to a direct question. The public joke had not made the room hers, it had made the record his. And the record, unlike a room full of people laughing with her, did not require her participation to stay accurate. Closure snapshot. The joint account was in read-only access by Wednesday morning, and the linked card declined at the coffee shop near Axiom when she reached for it out of habit. She paid cash and stood on the pavement for a moment before going back inside. The Axiom team knew within 2 days, not because anyone made an announcement, but because Demi had been at her desk and Petra had been at the elevator, and things in offices travel at the speed of a changed expression. Noel texted once a week later, warmly and briefly. She replied, and he did not reply to her reply. And his profile picture changed 6 days after that to one that included a woman she did not know at a bar that was not the Quartz. Sasha sent 3 sentences, that she was thinking of her, that she was sorry, and that she needed some distance for a while. The distance did not have an end date. Ivy came and went on the Tuesday and Thursday schedule, and Cade was at the door each Friday morning, professional and on time, communicating through the logistics of handoff rather than conversation. The finished puzzle sat on the shelf at his apartment, with one piece still turned face down. 3 weeks later, Leora sat in the family court annex waiting area, on a bench worn smooth by use, the document packet on her lap, and understood at last that the room she had believed she controlled had been built long before she arrived, carefully and without applause, by a man who preferred the record to the performance and had never once needed the room's laughter to know he was right.